I gotta tell you, content in January is dry. Right now, there's no music. Well, there is music, don't get me wrong. I bet a bunch of great artists are dropping music in at around this time, but nothing of note to me, sadly. So it's been dry for these past couple of weeks, so I decided to put this little video together to just give my recommendations, just to see if I can get any people in the subgenres of rap. So I don't know why I did this, but it could be fun. It was an idea that popped in, so I might as well run with it. I have 5 subgenres we're gonna go through today. Who knows, this could actually become an ongoing thing with different genres. We have 5 subgenres we're gonna go through. We're gonna go through abstract rap, experimental rap, because there is a difference between them. We have hardcore rap, we have horrorcore, and trap. We're just gonna start off with abstract music. And for this, I'm gonna be talking about a little subsection of this that has to do with the slums movement. When I was doing the research for this video, I actually learned that slums is actually a group, not a movement of sorts, a bunch of artists doing this type of music. So these members are Ade Hakim, Jazz Jody, Daryl Johnson, King Carter, Mason Drayling, and Mike. If you seem familiar with that name, I've covered Mike before. I liked his album from last year, Weight of the World. And this Slums collective has been influential for the past couple of years for making this lo-fi sound with an emphasis on more emotional, typically more depressing topics. And they tend to forego the typical structure of a typical rap song. Other artists like Navy Blue and Ka, along with producers like Black Noise, have leaned into this sound a lot more. But for this, I'm going to go with the biggest example of this, the one that got me into this sound, and that is Earl Sweatshirt with some rap songs. Hi, buddy. Yeah, me too. Some Rap Songs is very sonically different from Earl's past music. This seems like this generation's mad villainy when it comes to the impact that this album had on a wider audience. It's undoubtedly lo-fi, and listening to this is a pretty mind-bending experience overall. Lyrical content, like his past releases, are still tinged with darkness, but with this new sound, it hits a lot harder than before. There's a lot more emphasis on this once it's drowned out in these samples and these loops, and it was a much more hard-hitting experience than his past albums, as much as I like those. To me, Some Rap Songs opened up my ears to this brand new sound that I thought was unique and that nobody else was doing. But then there were the other artists in the Slum Collective, and of course outside of that, that have been doing this for years, and I hadn't even known about it. And funny enough, I mentioned Navy Blue before. He's one of the only features on this album, and because of him, that opened up that whole new world of Mike and the whole Slums Collective and that whole group and other artists like Mavi. And for each new release in the Slums movement or in this sound, I get more and more excited on how far the sound can go. And I want to thank Earl Sweatshirt for opening the sound to me and just overall getting me into a new type of music that I never thought I could like. When something is experimental, what do you think of? The official definition of something that is experimental is based on untested ideas or techniques and not yet established or finalized. When it comes to music in this term, something like that is very hard to come across. type of song that could have been experimental in the 70s would most likely be classified as, well, generic, typical for the sound now. There are also things in music that could be considered timeless. There are albums that I think are ahead of its time, that have come out in the past 15-20 years that are just as relevant as today. Although I also think that is a pretty objective term. When we talk about this experimental tone, this isn't really a rap album that I'm going to talk about for this, but the album I chose to get you into experimental music is Flying Lotus's 2010 magnum opus, Cosmogramma. Flying Lotus, or known by his real name, Steven Allison, described Cosmogramma as a map of the universe and a space opera of sorts, also wanting to fuse together music from the 20th century and the 21st century. It's going to be that bridge into the new sound that this decade or this century is going to have in music. Off of the first listen of this years ago, I feel like Ellison captured that perfectly. I've said this about a couple albums on here, and I think about this anyway, but words cannot describe how perfect these sounds are on this album. The collaborators on this are from Thundercat. We all know who he is now. He's a big name because of Flying Lotus. Tom York from Radiohead, Laura Darlington, and so many more. They all feel like they're guides throughout the universe that Steven Allison is mapping out. And it's really incredible. There's so many different fusions, along, of course, with rap, that Flying Lotus does on this album. And of course, he continues to push that sound with his next albums, with You're Dead and I don't even know how to say it. Flamagra? Wow, that was bad. But outside of that, Flying Lotus is always continuing to push the boundary in what music can sound like. And Cosmogramma is where it started. For hardcore rap, this is really something else. Artists like Run DMC, Schoolie D, and Too Short were some of the first artists or rappers to bring a more aggressive style to hip-hop, and critics eventually dubbed it hardcore. And essentially, these lyrics they're tinged with anger and confrontation. And most media outlets have associated a hardcore subgenre with gangsta rap. But the genre can cover so much more ground than this. There's so much more in hardcore rap than just gangsta rap. While these are characteristics of gangsta rap, violence and drugs are a near constant in this. And while some artists have shown these in different lights, in both positive and negative ways, there is one album that has stood tall, not just as a hardcore rap album, and not just as a rap album, but as an album overall. And that is the Marshall Mathers LP from Eminem. Even if Eminem's more recent albums are... Yeesh. The Marshall Mathers LP is a bona fide masterpiece. You want silly Eminem? You have The Real Slim Shady. If you want dark Eminem, you got Stan. You want a wholly disturbing Eminem, you have Kim. There's so much versatility in this album in terms of storytelling, and top-notch storytelling while I'm at it, actually. This is one of the best storytelling albums of all time. And while this album does have its flaws. The D12 feature is kind of weak, and that Ken Caniff skit. Barring all that, the lyrical content on this album is out of this world. I can't express that enough. And also, just pointing this out, while this isn't the biggest focal point of the album, the instrumentals here are great. But what surprises me most about this is that this guy made Revival. This guy said, white boy, you're a rock star." I can't believe it. I can't believe it. Next is probably my favorite rap subgenre out of the ones I picked here, horrorcore. This is one of the more controversial subgenres. Horrorcore takes more of a unsettling approach to hardcore. So this is a bit of a deviation from hardcore rap as well. One of the first hardcore artists to do this was the Ghetto Boys. They started working psychological horror themes and occult themes into their lyrics. And for me, horrorcore and hardcore can go hand in hand. But for specifically horrorcore, I've decided to pick 2 albums for this. And they're a bit of a duology. They're a bit of the same. And these are Clippings' 2019 and 2020 albums. There Existed in Addiction to Blood and Visions of Bodies Being Burned. And as I said, I consider these 2 releases to be a double album of sorts. Because of how stylistically similar they are, but there are 2 key differences for both releases. There Existed in Addiction to Blood has more of a slasher movie kind of vibe, and it has more traditional song structures. Well, at least for Clipping, they're traditional. And it's still pretty experimental. Not a lot of producers like William Hudson and Jonathan Snipes can back up such a vibrant and versatile vocalist and rapper like Daveed Diggs. I feel like There Existed in Addiction to Blood is the more accessible of the 2. There are more traditional sounds in this. I feel like Blood of the Fang is the best example without getting rid of Daveed's pure talent. But I would say that's one of my favorite rap tracks in recent memory. Another track I'd like to highlight off of this is La Mala Ordina with Benny the Butcher, El Camino, and the Rita, which is another more experimental track. I adore this track as well, but I feel like the experimentalism only goes as far as an extremely harsh wall of noise that's at the end of La Mala Ordina. And it's insane. I think my speakers almost broke it when I played it on vinyl once. Since I went with the slasher movie analogy, I'm going to describe the second album in this, Visions of Bodies Being Burned, as the psychological horror movie. Shit. This album scares me. Visions of Bodies Being Burned scares me as an album. I've talked about both of these albums in writing. I can actually link my reviews to both of them in the description. But I can't put in the words how terrified I was on my first listen of Visions of Bodies Being Burned. This is lo-fi hip-hop beats to torture/kill to. This, compared to an already experimental album, There Existed in Addiction to Blood, Visions of Bodies Being Burned is extremely experimental, and funny enough, they sample the Ghetto Boys on the lead single to this, which is where they got the title, Visions of Bodies Being Burned. Either way, this is one of the best 1-2 punches in music that I've ever heard. These 2 albums really redefined the sound for me, and I adore both of these. And even if this is a whole genre, this sound really belongs to Clipping. And while they may not continue with the sound with their next album, I want them to keep going with this at some point. Maybe not their next album, but somewhere down the line, I want them to continue with this horror sound. For this last subgenre, this is definitely the most popular out of all of these. Trap music. This originated from Atlanta, where traps would be a place to sell drugs illegally. Artists like Young Jeezy, Gucci Mane, and T.I., who actually coined the term on his album Trap Music, had pioneered the genre. But the popularity came with Waka Flocka Flame and his album Flockavelli. That was where it finally hit that popularity. That's when we got all these sounds. The influence of trap music can now be heard in pop music and in other foreign language music like K-pop and reggaeton as well. Although, there was always something missing from it for me. And what finally clicked for me is this album is where trap music was elevated to the highest quality. And that is Travis Scott with Rodeo. Trap music is barely called elegant, or rap in general, but Rodeo it's pretty elegant. This was one of the first trap records that kept me interested through nearly an hour's worth of music. Not a lot of albums can do that anyway, outside of rap, but it's quite an achievement. Many hour-long albums have struggled, as I said, to keep me interested, but Rodeo did something totally different here. Every time I listen to this, it just gets better. And it's been out for 5 years. I've listened to this quite a bit. It caught something that the trap genre hadn't caught yet, and that was emotion. It felt like these songs were alive in a way. There's so many examples that go over this that were just so great to hear. It revitalized the genre to me, and it really, I honestly think it saved it from going down in popularity. And what's great about it is Travis even successfully got that feeling back with ASTROWORLD 3 years ago. For each of these projects he's put out, I feel like that Travis is a leader in this psychedelic trap sound, and to me at least, it all started with Rodeo. Rodeo got me into a type of rap that I never thought that I would get into, and I'll forever commend him for that. And I believe that is going to be it for this. I hope you enjoyed. All of these albums are going to be linked below, so if you want to listen to them, go ahead. I'm not stopping you, but hey, I'll see you next time, alright?